made Egyptians, in reality, not worshipping statues, paintings, or animals, but they rather believed that these objects were manifestations of the God which they worshipped. I'm sorry for being maybe a bit detailed in these introductory remarks, but I think they were necessary for us to clarify the roots of the role of religion in the Egyptian mind, which in some aspects did not change its sanctification of the idea of worship of God, the afterlife, and the role of religion in general. But Egyptians throughout history, and particularly throughout history of monotheistic religions, were more amenable than other peoples to believe in and embrace Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which spread rapidly, each in a different historical phase among Egyptians. Today, religion in Egypt is involved in many aspects of life and is endorsed by what we can call conventional wisdom. The latest census undertaken in Egypt in 2006 did not include religious affiliation in its counting methods. So we cannot tell for certain the number of adherents to the different religions, which are usually rough estimates made sometimes by religious or by non-governmental agencies. What is sure is Egypt is predominantly Muslim country, with Muslims counting between 85 to 94% of the population, depending on what census you are following. And we are talking here about a population, again, of estimated between 80 to 88 million people. We don't have also an exact number of the population because the latest census, as I mentioned, was held in 2006. The vast majority of Muslims in Egypt are part of Sunni Islam and primarily belonging to two schools of Sunni jurisprudence, the Hanafi and Shafi'i schools. In addition, significant number of Egyptian Muslims also follow Sufi mystical orders. And there is a tiny minority of Shias that is believed to be numbering few hundreds. The remainder of the Egyptian population, other than the Muslims, and here we are talking about between 6 and 15% of the population, again, according to what census you are following, predominantly belong to the native Coptic Eastern Orthodox Church, known as the Church of Alexandria. This church has their own Pope, who is the Pope of Alexandria. And he has been independent from Rome, or from, at that time, Rome, later the Vatican, since early history of Christianity, due to some theological differences on interpreting the nature of Jesus Christ and other related elements. There are also various Protestant churches in Egypt. They claim the membership of almost 300,000 Egyptians. In addition, there is a Coptic Catholic Church, other than the Orthodox one, which again claim a similar number of adherents, 300,000 followers among Egyptians. There is a tiny minority again, but for several reasons known worldwide and significant worldwide, of Baha'is in Egypt. It varies in estimation between few hundreds to a couple of thousand. And even a smaller community of few hundred Jews, as well as a very limited number of Egyptians who identify themselves as atheists. The original ancient Egyptian religion disappeared. It doesn't exist anymore in Egypt today. But as I mentioned earlier, some of its customs or traditions permeated the three monotheistic religions whenever they came to Egypt, and molded these religions by what we can call an Egyptian mold. For example, we have, in the case of Coptic Christians in Egypt, they asserted from an early time their independence from Rome, and they developed their own theology. Also, from an early time, after Islam entered Egypt, they adopted the Arabic language as their language of religious rituals. On the other hand, as far as Muslims in Egypt are concerned, we have the very famous example and case of Imam al-Shafi'i, who, when moving from Iraq to Egypt, had to revise some of the elements of his school of jurisprudence in order to take into account the surrounding environment in Egypt, which influenced him very much. According to the current Egyptian constitution, and in Article 2 of that constitution, Islam is the official religion of the state, and any new legislation must be based on or derived from the Islamic Sharia. However, the same constitution bans political parties to be founded on religious basis. Of course, this constitution is expected to be amended after the forthcoming parliamentary and presidential elections that will take place in September and November of this year. Egypt also hosts two major religious institutions, namely Al-Azhar, founded in 1970 AD by the Fatimids as a center of preaching and learning. And I'll come to Al-Azhar for more details later. And the second is the Coptic Eastern Orthodox Church of Alexandria, established in the middle of the 1st century AD by St. Mark. In Egypt, historically and today, Muslims and Christians have lived as neighbors. They have shared a common history and national identity. They also share the same ethnicity, race, language, customs, and traditions. Copts, therefore, have been an integral part of the Egyptian society. There are no ethnic or linguistics or feature differences between Egyptian Copts and Egyptian Muslims. Both communities are found in all social classes, in all Egyptian geographical provinces, and all levels of education. There is no Coptic province per se, but there are definitely provinces with larger or smaller Coptic population. Here, if you allow me just to give a very famous example in Egyptian history, when Lord Cromer was the representative of the United Kingdom in Egypt as High Commissioner, and when Egypt was under British occupation, he sent a very famous telegram to his government in London, blaming them because they had misguided him according to this telegram. He told them that you told me that I'll come to Egypt and find natural supporters and allies to Britain among the Egyptian Copts, meaning the Egyptian Christians. However, when I came to Egypt, I couldn't differentiate between Egyptian Copts or Muslims because both have the same traditions, have the same behavior and attitudes, and both have a high level of patriotism and nationalism to their country. The only difference is that there are Egyptians who go to the mosque on Friday and Egyptians who go to the church on Sunday. So this is a very famous example about the national unity of the Egyptian people, historically and today. Religion plays also a very central role in most citizens' lives. And I'll give here the example of the adhan, the call for prayers. The adhan, in fact, which is heard 5 times a day, plays an informal regulatory role in different aspects of life in Egypt, whether social gathering, whether business meetings, whether media coverage issues. So people would give appointments to each other saying after the adhan, after the call of prayers of the Maghrib, for example, which is the sunset. So this is an aspect that's shared by all Egyptians, whether you're Muslim or a Christian or otherwise. Moreover, Cairo as a city is very famous for its minarets and mosques. In 1969 already, that's to say 42 years ago, Cairo was called the city of the 1,000 minarets and the 1,000 mosques. This number has definitely doubled, if not multiplied by now. But at the same time, Cairo is known for very historical and very important churches, like, for example, the Hanging Church. This religious landscape has been marred sometimes by extremely limited, infrequent, and sporadic cases of clashes between some Egyptian Muslims and some Egyptian Copts. Although some would refer these clashes to religious reasons or conflict of interest between citizens belonging to both religions, I can argue that this is not an accurate way in identifying real reasons of these clashes, especially if we bear in mind that the interaction in the daily life of Egyptians take place between them on individual rather than religious basis in every aspect of social interaction. So every citizen is acting in his capacity as an individual, as a citizen, irrespective of his religion, like irrespective of his educational background or his class affiliation. However, of course, we should admit there are extremists on both sides who have different views of the nature of the social contract which should prevail in the society, and who occasionally try to promote the cause of hatred and violence towards the other. But these extremists mainly have seized some turbulent political situations internally and externally in order to add fuel to this fire. In this respect, it's important to refer as back as 1798, French expedition against Egypt, during which some historians have recorded what we can call the first sectarian sedition in the modern history of Egypt, that, as I mentioned earlier, occasionally recur until today. It was shocking for Muslims of Egypt at that time to see the Coptic teacher, Jacob ben Hanna, who was a famous merchant, putting his huge wealth at the disposal of the French campaign and forming an army corps of some Copts in Egypt to join the French army and to participate in the fight against Egyptians. However, it is worth notice that most Egyptian Copts at that time boycotted Jacob and his army and didn't consider him representing the Egyptian Coptic community and didn't accept him calling his army the Coptic Brigade. This is because Copts have always maintained a very strong combined nationalistic and religious identity and pride themselves for their contributions not only to the Egyptian people, but to the Arab nation and to the Islamic civilization. Indeed, they had prominent contributions to all aspects of Egyptian life: political, cultural, social, economic, artistic, media, and otherwise. Since the era of Muhammad Ali, the founder of modern Egypt, who ruled Egypt between 1805 and 1848, Egyptian Christians worked side by side with Egyptian Muslims for the establishment of modern Egypt.